Hi everyone, welcome back to the Mind Body Herb podcast. I am your host, Mia Schick. We're going to be delving into 4 steps that you can take to optimize your hormones. No matter what hormone imbalance that you might be dealing with, maybe it's polycystic ovarian syndrome or PMS, endometriosis, menopause, or maybe you're just feeling like something is off and you're not sure where to even start. I know just how confusing and overwhelming it can feel. I know what it's like to not feel your best and to struggle with those symptoms and just feel like you're spinning in circles sometimes. So today I wanted to give you a clear, practical roadmap to get you started and a 4-step process to get you balancing your hormones in a way that actually works for you and your body and your life, and also for your nervous system too. When you're listening to this, I want you to think about taking things really, really slow, and that you don't have to do all of these things all at the same time. Something that I talk about over and over again with students, with my clients, is getting really good at building the foundations of your house or your health first, and then fine-tuning as you go. We're going to talk about that kind of strategy, about how we build solid foundations and what we can do to go in and fine-tune some things here and there dependent on what's going on for us specifically. So it's not a quick fix. This isn't going to happen in a month or 2 months or 3 months. Honestly, looking at your hormone health and managing your health and hormones and metabolic health is an ongoing process. And especially for women, unfortunately or fortunately, we're so sensitive to hormonal changes that happen throughout the month, but also through different phases of our life, through things like pregnancy, through perimenopause and menopause. And so things are constantly shifting for us. We're constantly needing to maybe reassess things and evaluating things and making changes where we need to. So again, just want to reiterate, this isn't do all these things at once. It's that slow and steady, sustainable pace. So I'm going to break it down into 4 steps and really dive into each of these steps or foundations for you for overall hormone support. So again, this is no matter what the hormonal imbalance is. So PMS, PCOS, endometriosis, menopause, hypothyroidism, high, low cortisol, it still all comes back to these 3 key things. What I've really kind of simplified overall health and well-being and hormone health into is 3 major pillars, one being blood sugar, one being gut and liver health, and one being stress management. So we're going to kind of elaborate on those a little bit more. So step 1, I know when it comes to hormone health, especially if you're looking on the internet, there is 1,000,001 ways to support hormones. So some might have you cutting out gluten or inflammatory foods, not eating soy, maybe it's intermittent fasting, plant-based diet, eating more protein. There's a lot of noise, right? And so it can feel very, very overwhelming. So the goal here is to kind of block out some of that noise and figure out what works for you. I'm going to share what I have found to work with not only myself, but again, with a lot of my clients. Step 1, this is a foundational piece that I work on with every single client, which is blood sugar regulation. Now, reason being, if we can hone in and keep our blood sugar levels nice and stable, avoid big peaks and valleys throughout the day, that is the foundation for overall health. And this is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck when you put some emphasis on blood sugar regulation. It's going to help with your hormones. It's going to help with your metabolic health. Going to help with your energy, mood, and sleep, and all the things. So this is why I always come back to this piece over and over and over again, and making sure we're dialing it in here. And even for me, like a lot of these things, I still have to come back to, and I still have to make sure I put an emphasis on, right? Even yesterday, to give you an example, like I got to lunchtime and I just didn't want to make a protein, and I just had a salad and there just wasn't enough there, and at night I was just really craving things. So it's still just keeping these things top of mind consistently. Let's talk about blood sugar and specifically how they influence our hormones and why it's such a key foundation. When we have stable blood sugar, that's when our hormones are happiest. When blood sugar spikes, what happens is insulin will rise. So insulin is a hormone that's produced by the pancreas. It acts like a key that lets glucose into our cells to be utilized as energy. So insulin rises when we eat food. It teams up with those glucose molecules to be let into the cells. But what happens if we have too much glucose? So to give you an example of that would be if you're having meals that are very high in carbohydrates or sugar. So maybe some examples might be you have a sugary coffee in the morning and a muffin. Not a lot of protein, or maybe a bowl of oats with banana, those sorts of things. Those mostly carbohydrates, they digest quite quickly, and then we get access to that glucose very, very quickly. And then our body kind of goes, okay, we got all the sugar in our system. What are we going to do with it? So insulin rises to help bring those blood sugar levels down. We utilize some of it, store some of it in the liver. Sometimes we store excess as fat. But if we have too high levels of blood sugar, too high levels of insulin, that can really influence our other hormones too. So in cases such as PCOS, insulin resistance is a very common thing to happen with PCOS, and also can be a main driver for higher levels of testosterone as well. So higher insulin can increase our testosterone levels. It can decrease our progesterone levels. It does have our blood sugar and our cortisol levels are directly linked as well. So if our blood sugar crashes, so that might mean if we are, again, eating meals that are mostly carbohydrates and sugar, or if we're going too long between meals as well. So something I commonly see with women are skipping that breakfast, maybe just having a coffee or something very, very small, or sometimes working through lunch, or just not planning ahead properly or bringing sufficient fuel throughout the day, or maybe just having lunch and then going for 6 hours until dinner. Then we get into dinner overly hungry, we overeat, we're bloated, and then still craving sweets and carbs after dinner, right? That is a scenario that we want to avoid. So when blood sugar levels drop, if they go too low, that actually triggers the release of cortisol. So our stress response kicks in, and that same thing there can influence our other hormones as well if our stress levels are too high. So we're going to get the stress piece a little bit further along. It's also connected to the thyroid as well. So chronically high insulin can slow thyroid hormone activity and lower our overall energy output, make us have a sluggish metabolism as well. So for a lot of hormonal imbalances, what I think of is what is the driver and what is the root as to why these hormones are out of balance in the first place. So it's not necessarily going in, if we have low thyroid function, just going in and trying to fix the thyroid by throwing some medication at it. Not to say that's the wrong approach, or specific supplements. For sure, those can have a time and a place in combination with changes with diet and lifestyle. But why are those hormones out of balance in the first place? And a lot of it comes back to things like our blood sugar. So really here is just consistency is going to be key. So making sure we're eating at regular intervals throughout the day. So this can help regulate our nervous system, help with digestion, and just help with over restriction. And those things can be very stressful on the body and just make hormonal imbalances worse. A few key things to think about when keeping your blood sugar levels stable. My go-to is always pick your protein source first. So plan your meal around what your protein source is going to be first and foremost. So maybe that's an animal protein, maybe it's something like tofu or tempeh, eggs, dairy products, cottage cheese, Greek yogurt. Maybe it's a mixture of plant-based proteins, maybe some beans and legumes and quinoa and hemp hearts, those sorts of things. Pick that first and then build the rest of your meal around it. So ideally, when we're looking at building our meals out, we want to have a balance of protein. So kind of a roughly good place to aim for, minimum 20, upwards of 40 grams of protein at your main meals. I kind of like to hit the middle at around 30, okay? So protein, fat, fiber, and color are the things I want you to think about when you're building out your meals. So when we have meals that combine those different macro and micronutrients, what it does is slows down digestion, so we're getting more a steady rate of glucose and energy to our system rather than a whole bunch of it at once. It's okay to, quote unquote, spike your blood sugar if, let's say, you're going for a run or going for our workout. We're going to utilize that glucose. Not really ideal if we're, sitting in our car taking our kids to school, or sitting at our desk at work all day, right? We don't want all of that sugar in our system. We want that sustained energy throughout the day. So protein, fat, fiber, and some color on the plate with fruit and vegetables. Another couple of easy hacks that you can do around blood sugar regulation. Especially important if you are somebody who is insulin resistant, which is very common with clients or people who have polycystic ovarian syndrome. Also for women in their menopausal years as well. Women, unfortunately, we get a little bit more insulin resistant as we get older. So that means we need to make ourselves more sensitive to insulin uptake, that glucose. So maintaining muscle mass, building muscle mass, utilizing weights. Lifting weights is really important. Walking after meals can be incredibly important. Actually getting sunlight might sound a little bit strange, but sunlight, especially in the morning and the evening, can activate our metabolic health and metabolic system and help us regulate our insulin sensitivity as well. So light is very important from ideally the sun, right? Not sitting under blue light too much, getting good quality sleep as well. Sleep can throw off our blood sugar, as does stress. So very important. Even further things like adding some vinegar or acidity to your meals can kind of further delay how fast your stomach is emptying, right? Blood sugar, a key foundation. What to hone in on here is recognizing some roadblocks. I mentioned a couple of them already. If you are somebody that doesn't eat any breakfast, maybe that's a place that you start finding a few go-to options that you don't have to think about too much. Got a good amount of protein, are easy to throw together before you go to work or school or get into your busy day, and that you can kind of rotate through. Or maybe lunch is an issue. Maybe you have to spend some time finding and creating some easy go-to meal options for lunches or maybe snacks. Start at one of those, and then once you get into the swing of things, move on to the next. When I'm working with clients, really the first 4 to 6 weeks is really looking at these foundations, maybe manipulating some of the meals that they're having and just changing a few things or adding to it to balance it out a little bit more, identifying those roadblocks. Maybe it's time for somebody, maybe they're just super busy, got a lot on their plate, and it's about finding easy things. Maybe someone's feeling overwhelmed, there's just a lot of information like I mentioned, and figuring out a few places to start there. So identify your roadblocks and let's create some consistency. This is like brick number 1 to the foundation of our health. Consistency, identifying some things that are maybe influencing our ability to make better choices, and then looking at balancing our meals out. Are we giving our bodies the things that we need at our meal times to help regulate our blood sugar, our hunger hormones, our stress levels, and all of those good things too? That's going to take you a while, right, to figure those things out, to figure out those anchor meals that I was talking about too. I'm not an overly type of practitioner that's going to give people super fancy meal plans with different meals for every single day and every single meal of the day. What I think the best thing to do is to find anchor meals, 3 go-to things for your breakfast, lunch, snacks. Dinner, I find people are usually okay with, and finding some rotation there. But even there, like, have kind of a few things in your back pocket that you can rotate through, and that's going to be the easiest. Then you can switch things up here and there as you go just to get in a little bit more variety. But consistency, anchor meals, that's going to be really key for this phase. So step number 2, the second pillar that I mentioned, is delving into gut and liver support. Why does this matter? The gut and the liver are absolutely critical for hormone metabolism and clearing. Poor gut health can drive inflammation, drive bloating, PMS symptoms, and even affect estrogen and testosterone balance. So just to give you some ideas of how the gut and the hormones are connected. So one of them being is we actually have a whole collection of bacteria in our gut called the estrobolome. Those are certain gut bacteria that help to recycle estrogen so that our body can either eliminate it or reuse it. If that gut is off or the microbiome is off, that estrogen can build up and lead to estrogen dominant like symptoms like PMS or heavy periods and breast tenderness. Number 2, thyroid hormone conversion. The gut and liver work together to convert T4, which is our inactive thyroid hormone, to T3, our active thyroid hormone. When our gut is off or our liver is a little bit stressed, this can slow down that conversion and lead to things like fatigue and weight gain and slowed metabolism. There's also a big link to certain conditions or hormonal like PCOS and endometriosis. There's been some recent research that shows how gut dysbiosis, so that means an imbalance in the gut bacteria. So potentially more bad bacteria to good bacteria. And that's very, very, very common in PCOS and endometriosis. So again, that gut bacteria can influence things like inflammation, even insulin sensitivity. So our gut directly influences our metabolism. And so these are key in all of these conditions. I did want to just briefly highlight the pill and gut health. If you are somebody who has been on birth control, specifically the birth control pill, it can really alter the gut microbiota and reduce diversity there. So it can be a big influence on estrogen metabolism, like I mentioned, and just overall digestive comfort over time. So if you have had a history of being on the pill, maybe you're looking to transition off of it, or maybe just looking for some supports for your body post-pill, then definitely diving into digestive health is going to be key. So that might be increasing your probiotic rich foods, maybe getting a good probiotic in there, and just really honing in on your diet to support your overall gut health. And we'll talk about some ways that you can do that a bit further here too. So the thing with digestive health, if it can be a little bit tricky to figure out exactly what is going on under the hood, so to speak, if something feels really, really off. Sometimes if we just go back to that step number 1 and we're working on balancing our meals out, maybe we're eating more whole foods, getting in more plant fiber, getting different types of food in, diversifying our plate a little bit more. Maybe we're really working on nervous system and slowing down and mindful eating. For many people, that can be enough to make significant changes and see significant changes in their digestion and reduce bloating and kind of regulate bowel movements and things like that. But for some people, they may need a more in-depth call if there is something else going on underneath. So those things can look like potentially like a candida overgrowth, so a yeast overgrowth. So that might show up as if someone's got a white coating on their tongue, if they crave a lot of sugar and carbohydrates, getting reoccurring yeast infections and UTIs would it be a big one, getting some gas and bloating as well. Maybe a parasitic infection, so that might entail a little bit more further in-depth testing there. Potentially things like small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, so that's where the bacteria that typically is colonized in our large intestine migrates over to the small intestine, and so that can lead to things like if someone's has a very distended stomach, the common theme that I hear is that, well, I feel like I'm 6 months pregnant. Certain carbohydrates, if I eat beans and legumes, I get immediately bloated, or if I have garlic and onions, those sorts of things. Maybe fluctuate between loose stools and constipation. Maybe it could be something like H. pylori, if someone's experiencing a lot of acid reflux, or they feel like food isn't digesting properly or just sitting there, or they have an aversion to meat or can't break down meat properly, a lot of burping and belching, then that might be something like a H. pylori infection that needs to be looked at. So there's lots of things, right? And so sometimes it can be a little bit tricky if we do have our foundations in place to know where to go and to navigate that. So just to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more. So one place that you can start again is kind of what I call the 4R protocol. So that might look like removing things that are irritating the gut to give it some time and space to heal. So big ones being like processed foods that have gums and fillers, artificial sweeteners and dyes. Alcohol is a big one. I'm sorry, but if you are struggling with digestive issues and looking at healing your gut, you're probably going to want to take out alcohol entirely for minimum 3, 4, or 5 months. I'm sorry. I just don't think it can be part of an overall, especially if there's a lot of things going on underneath. I don't think it can be part of your diet at this point. Allergens. So if there are some specific foods that you do notice upsetting you, sometimes gluten for people can be a good thing to take out just temporarily until things heal up, and then you can play around with things like sprouted grains or sourdough that are a little bit easier to digest. Then we want to look at overall kind of replacing what we've kind of taken out with foods that help overall digestive function. So that can be things like bitter foods to stimulate digestive juices, omega-3s, anti-inflammatory foods. Then we want to look at re-inoculating. So that's when we bring good bacteria back into the diet, fermented foods, and maybe a good quality probiotic if needed. And then also looking at repairing. So we want to repair the lining of the gut and build up that mucosal lining, that protective lining. So that might maybe include some nutrients like zinc or glutamine or things like slippery elm and marshmallow root that are very healing and sealing to the lining of the gut. So that can be kind of, step 2 from the step 1. But again, if you do suspect something underneath is going on that needs a better look, that maybe needs a more tailored protocol, then maybe you want to pull into some testing or work with a practitioner like myself who can help you fine tune things and come up with a sustainable protocol so that you can start feeling better, because it is tough, especially digestive issues. They can be tough to navigate on your own, tough to figure out what's going on, and just really influence everything in your life too. So worth spending some time and effort on healing the gut. Actually, that was kind of one of the things that got me into studying nutrition. When I was in my, early 20s, I was transitioning off the birth control pill. And I was frantically Googling, how do I balance my hormones? And one of the things that kept coming up over and over and over again was healing the gut. And I spent some time doing that, and yeah, it pays off. Okay, so now we've headed into step number 3, which is starting to look at targeted supports for specific conditions. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the overall foundation for any hormonal imbalance typically remains the same: that blood sugar support, supporting our gut and liver, and managing our stress and lifestyle. But this is where we can start to tailor our protocol to what's going on for us specifically and maybe our specific hormonal imbalance. So I'll give you a few examples of what that might look like. So this is going to be targeted diet changes and also supplement protocols as well. I'm going to go over the most common hormonal imbalances that I see and just talk about a few of the strategies that you might implement if you struggle with one of these conditions. So one condition that I see pretty frequently is polycystic ovarian syndrome. So this means that we have a number of different imbalances with our hormones, insulin resistant being a big one, sometimes higher levels of cortisol, higher levels of estrogen, higher testosterone, low progesterone, just to name a few. So these require so when we're looking at specifically things like insulin resistance, it kind of requires a little bit more of a strategy, especially when it comes to diet. So maybe in cases like this with insulin resistance, maybe we look at manipulating carbohydrate intake, so having carbohydrates earlier in the day around our workouts when our body and our muscles are more likely to soak up that excess glucose. Maybe that means doing a light fast at night, maybe around 12 to 14 hours between the last meal and the first meal of the day. That can be really beneficial for regulating insulin levels, especially overnight. Maybe in these cases doing a more tailored supplement protocol. I like to use inositol or chromium, things that really support blood sugar regulation. And maybe in this case, we do double down on healing the gut, because as I mentioned, there's a big connection there. Then we look at other conditions like endometriosis, so anti-inflammatory diets, including anti-inflammatory components in through the diet. The second one that I see pretty frequently is endometriosis. So key things with endometriosis: reducing pro-inflammatory foods, so processed foods, fried foods, refined sugar. Sometimes excess red meat can be a trigger, high omega oils like corn and soybean and sunflower oils, and then just looking at increasing anti-inflammatory foods, increasing fiber intake, and maybe looking at some other supports like curcumin or magnesium or omega-3 fatty acids. PMS and PMDD, two other common conditions that I frequently see. So here I would check things like their vitamin D levels, their iron levels, to rule anything out there. Here we might maybe even look at things like progesterone. Our progesterone levels dipping very low in that luteal phase, triggering some of these, especially feelings around before the cycle, and low energy, low mood, anxiety, trouble sleeping. And just what we talked about at the beginning, what's driving that as well, higher stress levels, maybe tailoring the nutrition around different phases of the cycle, or especially that week before, maybe having a more of an emphasis on foods that are warm and cooked, easier on the digestion, help to bring some groundedness during that time, root vegetables, foods that support progesterone production, foods that support magnesium, iron, blood building foods, magnesium rich foods, etc. Right? And maybe again a more tailored supplement protocol. B6 can be really good for breast tenderness and mood, zinc for mood, especially the week before the cycle, omega-3 fatty acids just for reducing overall inflammatory response. And then the last one we'll talk about is menopause. So with menopause, things that I think about, I mentioned this already, insulin resistance can be common, so not necessarily lowering caloric intake, especially if weight is a problem, but helping the body be more sensitive to insulin is key. A lot of adrenal support. So in menopause, when the ovaries aren't producing progesterone or estrogen, the adrenals kind of pick up a little bit of the slack there. And so if they're too busy pumping out cortisol and adrenaline, then our sex hormones get impacted. So really important for adrenal support. Their electrolytes, vitamin C, B vitamins can be very helpful. In some cases, adding some phytoestrogens to the diet through things like beans and legumes and flax and soy in some cases as well. So the important thing to think about here is that these supports just layer onto the foundations that we talked about on step 1 and 2. So I think a lot of the times we sometimes want to skip to this step and just do, well, what are the supplements and the things that are going to help? It may help you in the meantime by just taking supplements and not making any changes, but it's not going to be, it's kind of like putting a band-aid over a bullet hole, right? Eventually it's going to come off and you're going to have these things that you're going to need to address. So this is kind of that, again, step 3, more tailored, more targeted approach to your specific condition and what you're specifically dealing with. So with nutrition and targeted support in place, then we come to the piece that often gets overlooked, which is our nervous system and our lifestyle, and even furthermore, looking at our connection to ourselves, maybe potentially addressing past trauma that could potentially be showing up in some of these conditions, that psycho-spiritual connection. I'm a holistic nutritionist, so we look at all pieces of someone's overall health, not just about food, because there's so many different components. Now, I almost think that this step is probably the most important, but sometimes it's going to be the hardest to address. So I've kind of seen it twofold, where maybe somebody has, wants to make some changes in their life. So they make changes with their diet and exercise and lifestyle first, and then look into the nitty gritty, the things that maybe we don't want to look at, don't maybe want to confront, right? It's hard to do those things. Or I've seen it the backwards, or the opposite of that, where, I've done the hard work, I've looked at my things that I haven't wanted to look at and dealt with some of those personal things, and now I'm looking to make changes with the diet and lifestyle too. I definitely think you have to have a combination approach, and if you ignore this piece, then you're ignoring a really big piece of that puzzle. So we'll break these down a little bit further. So we'll talk about lifestyle, cortisol connection, and then just make some psycho-spiritual connections to some of these conditions and what's kind of going on from on a spiritual soul level as well. So we'll talk about lifestyle first. So lifestyle matters just as much as nutrition does. So things like sleep and stress and routines and movement, our relationship with food can all really influence our hormones. So in this phase, I would really encourage you to dissect your routines a little bit more and see what is working and what's not working. So looking at things like, how are you setting yourself up for the day? So are we starting the day off super rushed? Are we, hitting the snooze button till the last minute and jumping out of bed and not making breakfast or drinking water and just kind of go into the day? This is just going to be how the day continues to go. So maybe it is about being a little bit more disciplined, adulting ourselves a little bit more, that self-parenting, that's the word I'm looking for. Self-parenting ourselves a little bit more and making sure we go to bed on time. Sleep is absolutely imperative. If you want to have good hormone health, you just want to feel better overall. I have a lot of friends that are moms with really little kids, and I know that sleep is just kind of, you got to take what you can get. So, but if you maybe don't have kids or in a phase of life where your kids are grown or getting a little bit more sleep, then I would really prioritize it and going to bed, waking up at the same time every single day. Our body, our circadian rhythm just loves that. It loves to go to bed, loves to wake up at the same time every single day. And something to consider too is just getting to bed before midnight. So ideally, I think around 10 o'clock is like a good place to aim for. It has been said that the hours that you get to sleep before midnight actually count as double. So let's say you go to bed at 10, that's 2 hours before midnight. That actually counts as 4 hours of sleep. So important to get to bed a little bit earlier, right? So maybe you just start to shift down. Maybe you start to have a bit of a wind down routine. Maybe we turn off our notifications on our phones. Maybe we take our magnesium, have a hot bath, make sure our room is nice and cool, those sorts of things, right? So looking at our routines, looking how we're setting up our day, and then identifying some things that might be preventing us from feeling our best. I did want to touch on cortisol because I know I mentioned that as one of the key pillars. So cortisol, I talk about cortisol a lot. I have a couple other podcasts around stress management and how that shows up, but absolutely imperative to regulate our stress response, regulate our nervous system, and keep our cortisol levels in check as much as possible. There are sometimes things that are outside of our realm that we can't control. So I come back to the things that we can control. We can control things like eating regular meals. So coming back to that step one, very helpful support for regulating the stress hormones, not going too long between meals or letting those blood sugar levels drop, right? Something you can do. The sleep piece as well. So if we're not getting enough sleep, that can influence our cortisol levels the next day, right? Nutrient deficiencies can be another one. Not getting outside for enough light. Over exercising is a big one. So if you are somebody that's kind of going balls to the walls with your workout routine and really intense, or doing long amount of cardio, maybe you need to adjust some things, add in some more restorative, more balanced movement there. But then we also have the reverse where we're not getting enough movement too. So there's a lot of layers when it comes to stress. There's kind of the physical layers of things like inadequate nutrition and over exercise, or not enough exercise, not good sleep, environmental, and kind of psychological as well. So things like trauma or grief or loss too. So for a lot of people, it's different, a combination of those. But the key things to think about here and why regulating cortisol is so important for overall hormone health is because what happens when we're overly stressed or our nervous system is in that constant state of fight or flight, the body thinks the most important thing to prioritize is getting us out of that stressful environment, stressful scenario. So what it does is it shuttles all of our resources in order to make cortisol and handle the processes that can help us handle that situation, and then everything else gets put on the back burner. So our digestion gets impacted by it, our other hormones, so our sex hormones, our thyroid hormones being big ones too. So even if we're looking at like our hormone conversion, so there's actually a precursor when we're looking at how our hormones are converted from cholesterol, precursor that could be made to make progesterone will sometimes get stolen in order to make cortisol. And then, so that's where we kind of get those imbalances with the other ones, same with things like testosterone, etc. So body goes, cortisol, adrenaline, let's put our emphasis over here. We'll come back to these other ones a little bit later. Also requires a lot of nutrients in order to make those hormones. So vitamin C, B vitamins, magnesium, sodium, potassium. So a lot of those resources, again, are shuttled towards making those hormones, which could have been used for other processes in the body at the same time. Whenever we look at things like low progesterone, low testosterone, low thyroid function, just what we talked about before as well, what are the drivers behind it? So in a lot of cases, cortisol is a big driver as well. I talk a lot about our overall hormonal foundation. And so if we're looking at hormones like in a pyramid or like a triangular shape, you can kind of maybe visualize it here for a second. Maybe you have a pyramid, right? And so at that base of that pyramid, the two hormones that are going to have an influence on our other hormones, like thyroid and our sex hormones, at the base of that pyramid are going to be cortisol and insulin. So blood sugar and stress. Another key place to put some good attention on managing your stress levels, supporting your nervous system, right? Because that's going to have a ripple effect on those other layers of the pyramid on our other hormones. Thyroid's kind of in the middle, and then we have our sex hormones at the very top. I hope that kind of makes sense. But really, really important, okay? Other piece is just kind of healing our relationship with the body, healing our relationship to food. So really honing in on learning how to rest and slow down. If about almost every woman that I see piles way too much onto her to-do list or has just a lot going on, working multiple jobs, going to school, their mom, looking after the household, studying, doing all the things and trying to be all the things. You can be all the things, but not all at once. So sometimes we have to compartmentalize and figure out what season of life are we in? And maybe that's where we focus our attention on. Maybe we're spreading ourselves too thin. I know it's very common for moms to put everybody else's needs before their own and put themselves on the back burner. So this is your permission to move yourself up to that front burner and really prioritize yourself. Also just wanted to touch a little bit on kind of the hustle, go, 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 be productive mentality all the time as well. Your hormones are going to suffer if this is you're a type A, go, 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 perfectionist type of person. It's just really tough on the nervous system to kind of go with that and not learn how to slow down. So sometimes, if another key takeaway, permission to slow down, permission to rest. Resting is productive. Okay. The last piece that I just wanted to highlight, just to put some seeds into your mind in case maybe this is new or maybe it's under the surface and it's not something that you want to deal with. And this is kind of looking at the psycho-spiritual and feminine lens on hormonal conditions. So number one, feeling feminine and the divine feminine. So diving into that feminine energy is really about receptivity and flow and rest and intuition and creativity, cycles, connection. Sometimes with women that I see when they're with the women I see in my practice that I'm supporting on their hormone health or even their weight loss journey is really looking at things from a masculine approach, doing and busy and pushing and controlling and achieving and over managing things. For women we're very much more sensitive. Our hormones are more sensitive, so it requires a little bit more of a flow. So if you are kind of in that realm right now and like got that grip hold and you feel like you're doing all the things route and to a routine and by the book, maybe this is going to allow you a little bit permission to kind of go with the flow and kind of loosen those reins a little bit, tap into your own intuition. So really when we're looking at reclaiming those feminine qualities, that doesn't mean we're just like giving up our ambition. It means that we're having a balancing action with rest, creativity, and receiving, and a little bit more structure, but also allowing for some flexibility and flow within that. And transitioning into the next piece is just honing in on our cycle as well. One thing that I will elaborate a little bit on too is this just understanding what's happening in your body from a hormonal standpoint month to month and how those changes in your hormones and changes in your cycle influence your mood, your motivation, your energy. And having that understanding can help you just be a little bit more compassionate with yourself too. Recognizing that maybe pushing all the time isn't the right thing and that sometimes allowing for rest, especially that week before we're on our cycle, can be just really beneficial for overall hormone health. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about trauma and sexuality and just the connection that it has to hormonal imbalances. A lot of hormone conditions can mirror stored trauma in the body, especially around sexuality, self-worth, or boundaries. An example might be with endometriosis. This is chronic pain or inflammation can reflect on unprocessed emotional trauma, often around self-expression, intimacy, or even things like saying no. So that trauma can impact the nervous system, so that body starts to interpret those signals as danger, which leads to more of a hormonal dysregulation. Some kind of practical reflections that you can do, just kind of reclaim that pleasure, connection, and embodiment can be really supportive for overall healing, and including different modalities like gentle movement and breathwork, somatic therapy, creative expression. Asking clients is like, what do you do for fun? And sometimes, most of the time I get the question like, what do you mean I don't have any time for fun? I used to really like drawing or playing the piano, and so I think coming back to some of those things can be a really important part of the process. I think the question here really is like, where are we pushing? Where are we overdoing? Where are we ignoring our own needs? Where are we over functioning in that masculine energy or under receiving in that feminine energy? The hormone conditions, they're not just physical, they really reflect how we live in our body, how we respond to stress, how we process emotions, how connected we feel to our feminine essence. Healing is really about having a multi-layered approach. When we break it down even further, just to highlight a few things that we've already talked about, that physical, looking after blood sugar and the gut and liver and targeted supports, addressing that emotional connection, trauma, boundaries, self-expression, a more energetic, spiritual approach, reconnecting with the feminine flows in our cycle. We'll just wrap up with that and just some key points that I really wanted to land. Going slow. So as I mentioned, hormone healing is an ongoing process that's going to make you come back and reassess things over and over again at different time points of your life. It's not just a checklist to go off of every single day, doing everything by the book. It comes back to that intuition, trusting the body, slowing down as much as we need to, and just tuning in and giving the body what it needs. Your hormones are not going to be healed in a month or 2 months. Give yourself some time, 6 months to a year in some cases at the very least. And like I said, it's going to be an ongoing process. It's going to make you come back and reassess things as you need to go. Additional supports, if you are, you've built those foundations and you're wanting to do some further digging, things like functional testing can be supportive. So for gut health, maybe looking at a GI map or a hormone test, the Dutch hormone test complete. One-on-one coaching with myself might help you identify things that you may or may not see or might be missing, and just fine-tune that process a little bit. That accountability, checking in and just knowing exactly where to start. Maybe some meal guidance, supplementation, and just overall lifestyle planning. If you are wanting more of a roadblock tailored to your body, or testing to guide your choices and accountability to make these steps stick, then I work with women one-on-one to create a plan that is sustainable and supportive. And I just want you to know that healing your hormones is possible, but it's a journey and you really don't have to do it alone. If you are wanting some more support here, you can visit my website at www.miaschick.com for more information. I hope you found this helpful. I hope this cleared some things up for you. As always, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Share this with any friends or family members that might find this helpful, and I will catch you next week for the next episode. Bye, guys.